Hello again. Well, as you'll know by the title of this video, I'm going to delve into the ancient folklore associated with Crossroads. Now, it's a subject that's fascinated me for many years, and it's one I've touched on in a few of my videos. This is the Crossroads on Miles Cross Hill near the market town of Alford in the county of Lincolnshire, and like many such places, it has a reputation for being haunted. Now, in world folklore, a crossroads was thought to be a junction between our world and the spirit world, and consequently they were said to be places haunted by ghosts, evil spirits and witches. And the ghost here takes the form of a phantom black dog. One of the best documented sightings of the apparition occurred in the winter of 1978, when a woman driving to the market town of Alford, which is about a mile down the hill in that direction, saw a large black dog walk from the grass verge here on the left hand side of the road. She said, "As the car was rapidly gaining speed down the hill, I pressed hard on the brakes to avoid hitting the dog. It passed slowly across the road to the other side. As it reached the grass verge, an oncoming car headlight lit up the spot, and I saw there was no dog there at all. The shock of having to brake so suddenly, then realizing there was no dog, made me feel quite shaken. He was a big dog, the size of a fully grown Labrador. I had the impression he had curly hair. He did not look in my direction, which I think a real dog would have done. The spot where the dog appeared is at the end of a hedge, and he was going in a direction of the track leading across the fields to Well Grange in the village of Well." Now, I'm sure many of you will know that the folklore of Britain is littered with tales of phantom dogs. I have given many examples in previous videos, and this ubiquitous spirit of the landscape is often associated with lonely crossroads, ancient trackways and places associated with death. For example, the bodies of executed criminals were often displayed on gibbet posts placed at a crossroads. Now, those of you who are kind enough to regularly watch my videos might remember me visiting this crossroads a few years ago. It was said that W.J. Bateman, a struggling young poet from the nearby town of Alford, came here one night and sold his soul to the devil next to a tree that used to stand here. Now, I'm not going to repeat the tale. If you want to know more, then watch my video Mysterious Trees, but it's an example of the once widely held superstition that you can deal with the devil at the crossroads. In Greek mythology, it was believed that Hecate was the dark goddess of the crossroads, and there are numerous stories in world folklore of encounters with dark forces at such places. For example, in the book Faust, the eponymous character draws a magic circle at the crossroads in order to summon the devil. In hoodoo, the spiritual beliefs and traditions of West Africa, the crossroads is the most popular place to perform a certain hoodoo ritual. If you wish to be a greatly skilled musician, dancer or whatever one chooses, then bring the item you wish to master and wait at the crossroads on a specified night or morning. Here you will meet a spirit known as the rider or the devil himself. If you don't run in terror, then he will take the item you wish to learn, and when he returns it, you will be endowed with the gift of greatness. In the American Deep South, the practice of communing with spirits at the crossroads was an integral part of the African American hoodoo tradition. And the best known example of this in American folklore is the legend of the 1930s blues singer Robert Johnson. Johnson is said to have sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads, where he gained mastery of the guitar and went on to popularize the Mississippi Delta blues. It is said his songs Hellhound on My Trail and Crossroads alludes to his bargain with the devil. The story of Robert Johnson has been greatly mythologized. Although he was a believer and a practitioner of hoodoo, he never claimed to have performed the ritual at the Crossroads, but he never denied it either. In Britain, there was a long tradition of burying both murderers and suicides at the Crossroads, as both crimes were seen as equally abhorrent. The official term coroners used for suicide was felo de se, literally crime against oneself, which resulted in the body being buried at the Crossroads with no religious ceremony and a stake driven through the heart. This was in keeping with the superstition that wherever there is a 4-lane ends or a place where 2 roads cross each other, a ghost is to be seen. It was believed that the suicide would return as an evil spirit unless they were staked to the earth, and if they did return, then the confused spirit would be trapped at the Crossroads. Crossroads burials ended in 1823, largely due to the better understanding of mental illness. But prior to this, it had been a custom in Britain since Anglo-Saxon times, and evidence of the superstition can still be found today. I'm in Kesgrave Wood, where there is a grim reminder of an ancient tragedy and a burial at the Crossroads. Now, according to popular legend, John Dobbs was a shepherd who in 1750 hanged himself in a barn at nearby Hall Farm. He was buried here at the Crossroads, the boundaries between the parishes of Kesgrave, Martlesham, Foxhall and Brightwell. Now some say the grave is that of a highwayman who was left to rot on the gibbet near the roadside, while others say it's the grave of a gypsy hanged for sheep stealing. But records show that John Dobbs was employed as a shepherd at Hall Farm, Kesgrave, later known as Grange Farm. The true story of Dobbs is unclear. It's not known why he hanged himself, but it's been suggested that he lost one or more of the sheep in his care, and he feared his punishment would be transportation to the colonies. He had already suffered a great deal of misfortune in his life. His wife Anne had died shortly after giving birth to their twin sons, James and Henry, who also died just a few months later. Now, as a suicide, Dobbs was cut down and his body was taken here to the 4 Crossway, and a stake was driven through his heart. And of course, it is said that his ghost haunts the area. Now, according to local folklore, in 1936, Dobbs' ghost appeared to a group of drunks who had visited the nearby Bell Inn, and this encouraged them to go to the Crossroads and to dig up the grave. They unearthed a human skeleton with a wooden stake in its ribs. But before they reburied the bones, a man called Reeves opened the jaws of the skull and pulled out one of the teeth, and it is said that he wore it on a watch chain for the rest of his days. But that wasn't the only desecration. Just 4 years later, a young airman thought it would be amusing to dig up the grave. So, on a dark and stormy night, he came here, but as he started to dig, he was chased away by the angry apparition of the long-dead John Dobbs. In the 1960s, a group of youths decided to dig up the grave, but they also reported being scared away by a terrifying apparition. Today the site is maintained by the landowner and the local council, and there's been no vandalism here for many years. So for the present at least, Dobbs can rest easy in his grave. This is the church of St John the Baptist near the village of Butley in the county of Suffolk. The church dates from the 12th century and it's a Grade II listed building. Just a short distance from the church is Butley Priory with its remarkable gatehouse. It's possibly the finest surviving medieval gatehouse in England. The abbey was founded in 1171 by Ranulph de Granville, but unfortunately I can't get any closer than this, as it's now a private house and occasionally it's used as a wedding venue. But no matter, both the church and the abbey are just the backdrop to a medieval tragedy. In 1506, Robert Brahma became Prior of Butley. During Brahma's brief term of office, Henry VII granted to Butley Priory the church and monastery of Snape Priory, which almost immediately plunged Butley and its prior into terrible debt to the crown, with no hope of repayment. Brahma became so desperate that on May the 25th, 1509, he committed suicide by hanging. Under normal circumstances, Brahma would have been interred in the priory church, but as a suicide, it was forbidden for him to be buried in consecrated ground. So it was decided that Brahma would be buried outside the church wall. However, the monks could not bring themselves to bury their prior in unconsecrated ground, and a grave was dug here in Butley churchyard. The burial took place in the early summer of 1509. But in the September of that year, orders came from the bishop that the body was not to remain in sanctified ground. It must be exhumed and buried somewhere else. Somewhere else was here at the Crossroads, where his body remains to this day. And it's believed that this is the earliest recorded case of a roadside burial in East Anglia. And of course it'll come as no surprise that the ghost of the tragic prior walks the crossroads and is said to haunt Butley Gatehouse. In the 1800s, when the building was being used as a vicarage, one of the rooms was kept constantly sealed and known as the Ghost Room. I'm in the city of Lincoln in Lincolnshire, where I will show you the last crossroads on our journey. Now, there are no colourful legends or ghosts and magic here as far as I know, but it has a truly grim history. And you could never imagine the terrible things that happened right where I'm standing. I'm at the crossroads at Westgate and Burton Road in the shadow of Lincoln Castle, and until around 1815 this was the place of public execution here in Lincoln, and this area used to be known as Hangman's Ditch. The gallows here consisted of two vertical posts supporting a crossbeam. Now, hanging in those days wasn't a quick and easy death by any means. It was basically slow strangulation. The condemned would be driven here on a horse-drawn cart. A noose was placed around the prisoner's neck, and after a few prayers delivered by the chaplain and sometimes a few words addressed to the crowd by the prisoner, the executioner would lead the horse away. The wagon would roll forward, leaving the prisoner choking and struggling at the end of a rope. In fact, this is where the pub opposite the Strugglers Inn gets its name. But you could meet a far worse fate than hanging here at Hangman's Ditch. In 1772, Elizabeth Elsom was burnt at the stake here for the murder of her husband. She was brought from the prison barefoot and covered in tar to speed up the burning. She was then placed by the executioner on a tar barrel A rope which ran on a pulley through the stake was fixed about her neck, and her body was fastened to the stake by 3 irons. And according to a contemporary report, the fixing of the irons took about 5 minutes, the executioner mercifully taking the opportunity of pulling the body downwards to ensure strangulation, which, however, was strictly illegal. Wood was then piled around her and set to fire. The fire burned with great fury, but it was fully half an hour before this wretched woman's body was completely consumed. Burning at the stake was the ultimate punishment in England for high treason or petty treason. Petty treason was the murder by a woman of her husband, as a husband was considered the wife's superior in the eyes of the law. 25 years later, in April 1747, Mary Johnson was burnt at the stake at the same place as Elizabeth Elsom, and for the same crime. There is little information regarding the execution, but we can only hope that, like Elizabeth Elsom, she was first garroted before being consigned to the flames. This horrific act is often associated with witchcraft, but in truth, with the exception of Scotland, burning at the stake was seldom used for that crime in the British Isles. Most witches were hanged, and there is a fascinating account of 2 witches hanged here at Hangman's Ditch, but that is a story I will save for another time. William Ward was the last person to be hanged here for the crime of burglary on the 1st of April 1814. From 1815, executions took place on the northeast tower of the castle known as Cobb Hall, and I'm sure there'll be more about Cobb Hall in future videos. That's just about it for this video. As usual, if you have made it this far, then thank you very much. And if you've enjoyed the journey, then please join me again next time.